Welcome to one of the past HSC exam question videos. This exam question, or in this video, we'll cover this exam question, which comes from the 2011 paper, and it's question 26, and it's worth 6 marks. While doing seconds, I read the actual question. Once I read the question, you get about 5 seconds to pause the video. Once you pause the video, attempt the question, then press play when you're ready, and I'll go through the marking guidelines and a sample answer for this question. But the question itself says, in assessing the effectiveness of the global polio vaccination program started in 1988, a student collected graphs A and B from 2 reputable sources. Graph A says reported annual global polio cases from 1988 to 1996, and graph B says estimated annual global polio cases from 1988 to 1996. Question 26. Identify 2 similarities and 2 differences between the information contained in graphs A and B. B. Recommend 2 additional types of data that could be used for evaluating the effectiveness of the global polio vaccination campaign. So when you're ready, pause the video and attempt the question. Welcome back. So hopefully that was okay to read, but basically to get full marks of 4 out of 4, what you should have written is we provide 2 differences and 2 similarities in the data. So that's 4 out of 4. If you only provided 3, so either 1 difference and 2 similarities, or 2 similarities and 1 difference, that would have been 3 out of 3, 3 out of 4, sorry, and then 2 would be 2, etc., etc. So what you should have done is, these are the how it's similar. So for example, they both look at polio, right? So it says the annual global polio, is how it's similar data. Also, they look at the same time frame, so between 1988 and 1996, so both the same time frame. And they look at the reported cases, so what they're actually examining are the reported cases. So they're not looking at apples and pears, they're looking at the reported cases of polio. And this one would have been maybe dangerous to write. They both have bar graphs, because this is not actually information, this is kind of the presentation of information. So these 3 would have been definites, this one would be a maybe, right? But this is how they're similar, and this is how they're different. So the one of them says it's the reported data, the other one is the estimated data, so that's where one difference. Then we've got different numbers, so for example here it says in 1996 it's 3,995, whereas here in 1996 it's more like 32,800, right? So that's how it's quite different, it's almost 10 times as much. We've got rounded numbers in this one. Here they're always rounded, whereas here they're exact. So rounded versus exact. And these are 3 differences between the data. So to get full marks, you just have to say 2 of these. So 2 of here and 2 of here, or any other thing that you've noticed, which would have been similarity difference, but 2 of each, and you get your full marks. That's a pretty easy way to get full marks. The next question is recommend 2 additional types of data and how they can be used to evaluate the effectiveness. So to get your full marks, what you should have done is, marking guideline here, you should have provide reasons in favor of 2 additional types of data. So actually not just say what kind of data, but also provide reasons. So for example, you could have looked at data before 1998, and the reason being is there might have been a drop before 1998. So if, for example, it's kept starting to go down before 1998, if there was a downward trend, that might mean that the vaccines might not have been the cause, because vaccines were introduced here, more or less. So if we had that data, we could have had a definite conclusion. If there was no downward trend, then it would have been the vaccines that caused that fall. And maybe we couldn't get data from individual countries. This is looked at global. We could have gotten maybe from individual countries and compare the countries' data from where we had no vaccination campaign versus the actual countries that had a vaccination campaign in 1988, right? So that could have been some of the actual things you looked at. And how to word that? Well, what I wrote is, first, the time period that was examined could have been extended to include years prior to 1988. So this is the additional data, right? But also need to actually give reasons as to how this could help. This would allow us to examine if the downward trend of polio cases began when the vaccination campaigns began or already started beforehand. So this would be a kind of a proof. You could probably have written maybe just one more statement saying, if it had started beforehand, this would have basically shown that it was not vaccines. And then what I still wrote about the other one, so the second part was data from different countries could have been provided. This would allow us to compare the data of countries that had not started vaccination campaign to those that have already had them underway since 1988. This could further provide evidence for the effectiveness of vaccines, right? So if we have one country which started in 1988 and has a huge fall in the numbers, whereas the country that didn't start in 1988 didn't have that same fall, that might be a proof that these vaccines actually work. Right? But basically, you have two data suggestions and reasons why they might be useful. These questions both came from this dot point. In terms of secondary sources to evaluate the effectiveness of vaccination programs in preventing the spread of disease, but most of these are actually skill, so they're testing your ability to interpret graphs. This is more of a skill question with a bit of relevance to content dot point as well. But hopefully that was useful.